Welcome to Nice Hashes. I'm Nate.
And I'm Mike. What are we smoking today, Nate?
We are smoking a Rocky Patel Corojo The Edge. Or maybe it's Rocky Patel The Edge Corojo.
Either or.
One of the two.
Don't matter.
One of the two. So I'm excited. Rocky Patel, we've had pretty good luck with them.
I am excited. Full disclosure, I've smoked this cigar before, so I know for a fact that it is good.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Speaking of spoiler alerts, and one of the biggest ones being that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, I'm sad that James Earl Jones passed away. Of course, he was in many other movies besides Star Wars, but definitely a notable role for him, for sure.
I heard the unfortunate news.
There's a bit of spice on this cap, Mike.
Yeah, it's a spicy cigar.
Well, I am lit, and I quite like the first few puffs. I know that's not necessarily indicative of the rest of the cigar, because some really good cigars have not very good first few puffs. But that's not the case with this one.
Yeah, it's a good light. I immediately blew the smoke out of my nose, and it burns.
Okay. I'm pairing mine with something that's weird. It's one of the tall cans, but it's called a Montucky Cold Snack, and they call themselves the official unofficial beer of Montana. So I don't know where the Montucky comes from, but it's a lager. It has like the recycle symbol and don't be a jerk. And then I guess they give 8% back to local causes. So I don't know. It's a very cool kind of like retro can with mountains and moon coming over it. I'll take a picture with the cigar so everyone can see it at home. I've never had this before. I saw it. It was kind of a visually striking can. And everybody who listens to the show should know that Mike and I appreciate visually striking things.
Yes, we do. Do they age it in bourbon barrels?
I'm not sure where they age it. Doesn't really say. It didn't come in a box or anything. It just came with the turtle killers. You know what I mean?
Yes, real turtle killers?
Oh, yeah, the plastic 6-pack things.
Oh, wow.
I always snip them with scissors. I take the extra 5 minutes and just make sure that nobody can be choked by it.
I always snip them also. It's easy to do.
Yeah, it's easy. It's the right thing to do.
I am pairing mine with Whistler and water. So
all right.
I had a remainder of a bottle left. Same bottle that we had when Gravy was here. And
all right.
Yeah.
Perfect. What are we talking about, Mike?
So, for those listening who are not in the United States, we are at the start of hunting season in the United States. So, bird hunting usually opens traditionally September 1st. And that's doves, typically, and crows, and things like that. And then they slowly add in grouse and pheasants. And they'll have a turkey season, and all the birds will have their own season. So I figured, it being bird hunting season, we would cover the only firearm you're allowed to hunt with birds with, the shotgun.
All right.
Yeah. And this may turn into a two-parter, so if you do not want to hear about shotguns for 2 episodes, just listen to the end, and we'll tell you how great the cigar is.
Or how great it isn't. We'll see.
Yeah, spoiler alert, it's going to be great.
Because Mike's already smoked it. He got the teacher's notes before he took the test.
Yes, I've also smoked the cigar we're going to smoke after this one. Shocking, I know. I'm cheating.
As one does. That's Mike's prerogative.
Yes. So, history of the shotgun. We're going to begin. Shotgun history dates back to the 1500s in Europe, where smoothbore firearms were first known as fowling pieces. Shotguns traditionally have been used for hunting birds. Very early shotguns had barrels 4.5 to 6 feet in length. That is approximately 2 meters. And they were loaded with multiple projectiles called shot. This era is when the term... go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to get right in the middle of your thing. How long are modern shotgun barrels?
Modern shotgun barrels, we're going to get into that, but preview, 18 inches minimum to 40 inches. Which 40 inches is a meter.
Yes, so not as long. I was just wanting a comparison, to say hey, they were 4 to 6 feet long. That if somebody's not seen a shotgun or shot a shotgun, that doesn't mean a whole lot to them in terms of modern shotguns. So I just wanted the little comparison.
Modern shotgun barrels are usually a little over 2 feet long, typically. But we're going to get into that later.
Sure.
Yeah. This is the era where the term scattergun emerged, and early shotguns were more cannon-like than shoulder gun-like, and they are similar to what would be currently called a punt gun, which would be a cannon mounted to the front of a boat that has shot put into it.
Okay.
Yes. So over time, they became less cannon-like and more modern, and they developed into a style that would be carried by somebody else and shot over the shoulder, etc., etc. And the designs pretty much matched black powder firearms with external firing mechanisms like flintlock or a lit wick, and shot instead of bullets.
Okay. Where does a blunderbuss fit into this?
A blunderbuss is a German firearm that is very similar to a shotgun, and I believe it is a subtype.
Oh, okay.
Yes, because they have the horned end and all that fancy stuff. Yes. So we're going to take a quick side street and talk about uses. So shotguns were, of course, immediately taken up by militaries, and the British military especially enjoyed them. They were loaded with multiple musket balls to increase damage on firing lines, and they came into their own during World War I, used for trench warfare. These shotguns were heavily modified with extremely short barrels and no stocks. During World War I, the German military wanted to ban shotgun use because of their effectiveness in trench warfare. And of course, the Allies said no. So the Germans would immediately execute any soldier found with either a machine gun or a shotgun. So they were viewed the same. Oh, go ahead.
So the Germans asking for the shotgun to be banned reminds me of the scene in Liar Liar where Jim Carrey screams objection and the judge asks him why. And his response is, because it's devastating to my case.
Pretty much.
So the listeners won't know this because editing and pausing and things, but we had a brief bout of technical difficulty. And as we were doing so, I was taking some pictures for our Instagram, and I noticed on the inside of the Rocky Patel label, and on these edges, they only put a label down near the end that you light. So I noticed some writing on the inside of the label, and they have on the inside of the label, the edge that is against the actual cigar, they have printed, beware of imitations, original edge, Rocky Patel. So apparently there are cigar forgeries happening out there, so be careful, one and all. Had you noticed that before, Mike?
I had not noticed the inside of the label before, to be honest with you, which I'm kind of surprised, because I've smoked a lot of these cigars. I've never looked. I always pull them right off the end of the cap. So, yeah, the Germans requested that shotguns be banned, and of course, our wonderful Allied troops were using the shotguns very effectively, and so the Allied powers said no. So when the Germans and the Austrians would capture a shotgunner, just like a machine gunner, they would be immediately executed and not put into POW camps. Since then, the shotgun has fallen out of favor as warfare has become more distance-oriented, and it did make a comeback for certain conflicts like Vietnam. But it is largely now used by police for breaching and things of that nature, and I'm sure you guys have all seen it.
Yes.
Yes. And the civilian market now, of course, has these tactical shotguns, and we'll get into that later, too, as I'm going to shit on them, as everybody can expect. So, civilian use, shotguns, of course, were always popular for hunting, and we're going to get into the history of that in context of the timeline. So, turn of the 1800s is really the big start of the invention of what we now consider the modern shotgun. By that time, firearms had become smaller, they were shoulder mounted, they were no longer cannons, and were being used by many, many people. Not just the elites. So at some point in England, at the start of the 19th century, 1800, percussion caps were first introduced to shotguns, replacing flintlocks. And that was a hammer fire operation. In 1812, the first breech-loading shotgun was invented by a gentleman named Samuel Johannes Pauli, a Swiss engineer. Pauli's design utilized a fully self-contained cartridge consisting of primer, case, and cartridge, which is essentially the modern shotgun case. This is essentially the first non-pan-fired muzzle-load-based system around.
Okay.
Yep. And that was, of course, black powder.
Yes.
Yes. So,
And this was even before like rifle and handgun rounds went to cartridge?
yes, this is before handgun and rifle rounds were commonly put in cartridges. These are be like the paper wad rounds that you would shove in from the front. Yeah. But this one was from the rear, and then you would close the breech and you'd put a cap on, and it would ignite from the rear, and it would be a swing door on the back. Similar to black powder guns, or black powder rifles, if you know that style of paper prepackaged unit.
Okay.
Yes. So in the 1830s, and nobody really knows who invented it, the first hinged shotgun was created. And these were created in England by their gunsmithing culture for the aristocratic hunters that dominated that landscape. And we're going to be noticing a significant increase in our timeline here. So in 1866, the first double-barreled shotgun was invented by Joseph Lang in England, and it was slowly perfected. And by 1914, the double-barreled side-by-side shotgun had essentially stopped developing entirely. And we all know what the side-by-side shotgun is.
Yeah, that's like the Elmer Fudd.
Yes. Yes, it is.
All right.
So the side-by-side shotgun was readily adopted by civilians in the United States, and it is one of the guns that won the West. It is the famous stagecoach gun that we all know and love. So, in 1878, Daniel Myron Lefevre, it's a mouthful, was credited with inventing
That's what his wife said.
Yes, he invented the first hammerless shotgun, and that is the beginning of the end right here. Because now, for the next several minutes, we're going to be talking about one man and his achievements. Can you guess the name of this one man, Nate?
Remington?
Good call, though. Good call.
Not a bad guess.
Not Winchester. A bad guess.
Winchester.
Ah, another really good guess. Another really good guess.
But still a swing and a miss.
Still a swing and a miss. His gentleman did work for Winchester and Remington.
All right, I think I have an idea. I'm trying to... Mossberg.
No.
All right, and he's out. He's out.
So who we're talking about is John Moses Browning.
Browning, that guy.
Yep, Browning. And he's going to be pretty much the inventor of what we consider the modern shotgun.
Okay.
Yes. So in 1887, Browning invented the first lever-action smokeless powder shotgun that used modern shells. And this is the very first repeating shotgun that used smokeless powder, and it was a proof of concept, and it pretty much started the shotgun revolution.
I think a lever-action shotgun would be baller to shoot.
They still make them.
Ooh.
Yep. Henry Firearms and Chiappa both make lever-action shotguns. And you can see.
Okay, well, everyone, Christmas is coming up. It's not that far away anymore.
They're not cheap, but they're there. All right. 1893. This is a big year. It was the first smokeless pump-action shotgun. It had a hammer design, external hammer, and it was the first takedown shotgun ever patented. After this point, pretty much every shotgun that's been designed is a takedown shotgun, which means you can take the barrel off the receiver.
Yeah, take the barrel off. You can slide the firing pin mechanism out.
Yep, you can take the spring out of the tube. You can insert block, all the modern stuff other than external hammer. Mm-hmm. Yep. 1897, Browning invents, yet again, another pump-action shotgun that shot smokeless powder. This time it had an internal hammer. This particular shotgun was in production until 1957, when it was replaced by the BPS, which is still in production today. And this pump-action shotgun is pretty much the granddaddy of every pump-action shotgun that's made to this day. It's almost unchanged.
So, Mike.
Yeah.
I have a little question, and this might have more to do with where things are manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up, my family, namely my grandfather, did not like Browning because he called them like manufactured in Japan or something. Mm-hmm. But Browning was an American, or was Browning English?
Browning is an American.
Okay. Did they move their manufacturing overseas? At some point?
So Browning manufactured firearms in the United States and in Belgium. And then at some point, they stopped manufacturing in the States and they moved to both Belgium and Japan. So some of them were manufactured in Belgium and some of them were manufactured in Japan post-World War II. Mm-hmm.
Seems like a weird quibble to have, I guess, about Browning, but that's what I remember growing up was all,
Japan manufacturing was considered inferior in the 1950s. It's not like it is today where Japanese manufacturing is amongst the best in the world.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it was not like China of today, but it's similar in concept.
Sure.
If you know what I mean. Yeah. Now here's another big one. 1900. The automatic 5 was patented by John Browning. This is the first recoil-operated semi-automatic shotgun, and it was in production until 1998.
Wow.
This is the granddaddy for all semi-auto shotguns that are manufactured today.
For all the tactical dudes?
No. These are like 9-pound wood and steel monstrosities. And guys, I know a lot of guys that are in love with the old automatic 5s. They're very collectible.
Oh, sure. Very
collectible. And I have a A5, but it's a modern A5.
Okay.
Not the original design. And it's the humpback, a beautiful firearm, traditionally made. Just a lovely, lovely gun. Next big year, the last one for John Browning. This is not the John Browning show, but it could be. Is 1923. John Browning patented the first over and under shotgun. So previous to 1923, there were no over and unders.
Okay.
They're significantly cheaper and easier to manufacture than side-by-sides. And it has obviously 2 shots. The receiver itself is easier to mill in a machine. Okay. Yeah, the side-by-side was invented for handsmithing, whereas the over and under was invented for machines to produce.
Got it.
Yes. Now, John Browning's intention for the over-under was that it would be the last legal multi-shot shotgun to be banned by the United States government. So you have to remember...
That was his intention?
That was his intention. Yes, because many of his firearms had been banned in his lifetime because he invented the submachine gun and he invented other semi-automatic firearms as well. And the U.S. government was rapidly banning his designs for civilian use. And he was afraid that the U.S. government would try to take guns away. And you have to remember, this was during Prohibition, when gun crime was going wild. It was just after World War I. Yeah. And of course, the government overregulating the market caused an illegal underground explosion because the Thompson submachine gun was also based on a John Browning design. And the grease gun was a John Browning design. And those are the 2 top firearms for the criminal underground. And both were made illegal. So
he's like the Nikola Tesla of firearms.
Yes, he is. He more or less invented every modern firearm that we use, including the 1911 pistol, which most handguns are based on. Like I say, this is not the John Browning show, but he was a genius with firearms that connected the world of black powder to the modern era. Okay. And it was pretty much him by himself that did it all. Because
he wasn't like a Theo Holtzman.
No, he was not like a Theo Holtzman. No. Yeah. So, like, I own a 870, 2 870s, and they're both Remington's copy of the John Browning design,
Yeah, I have a Remington 870 as well.
There we go.
And I only have one Browning, and it's the Browning A-Bolt 30-06.
I have a...
But it must have been when Japan got their manufacturing back up to par. He bought me this one because he said it's literally the best 30-06 on the market. So,
and Browning still manufactures the finest guns because, like, a Browning high power is a 9mm pistol based on the 1911 design. It's probably the finest semi-automatic pistol money can buy.
Okay.
That's also a John Browning design, FYI. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I like Browning. I have some Brownings in my collection.
Yeah, I don't have anything against them other than, the weird childhood. But, my grandfather was World War II, and if their manufacturing wasn't very good right after World War II, that was kind of his formative years. So that would have stuck with him. Yeah, it's funny how things change over time, To one point, something might be bad, and then they hit the pinnacle, but then that's too expensive, and it goes somewhere else, and the process kind of starts again. Although I don't know that a lot of places where a lot of things get manufactured now are actually trying to do better. They're just trying to crank out more units. So I think there's a slight difference with modern manufacturing, but
Oh, for sure. And we'll discuss this, I'm sure, later, but
yeah,
modern shotguns are trash. It is hard to get a good shotgun nowadays unless you get into the $2,000 minimum $1,000 range, $2,000 for a semi-auto.
Oh, wow.
It's going wild, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
But yeah, the last major timeline that we have is 1953, because in 1953 the J.C. Higgins Model 60 came out, which was the precursor for the Remington 60, which came out in 56.
Okay.
And it is the first gas-operated semi-automatic shotgun that was available to the civilian market. And gas-operated shotguns are very popular.
So, Mike, I have a technical question, which I'm sure
Yes.
you're more than prepared to answer. You said Browning had a recoil-operated semi-auto, and then they came out with a gas-operated semi-auto. So I think I'm familiar with the gas-operated semi-auto because I believe that's what most modern semi-autos are. They use the gas from the explosion of the shell to drive the cocking mechanism back, right?
Yes.
So what is the recoil-operated?
So
Are
a
you
recoil-operated...
talking Browning invented the bump stock before it was cool?
No. No, recoil drive is inertia. A colloquial term would be inertia driven or a blowback. So the force of the shell coming back from the explosion is what cycles the mechanism. It doesn't use the gas. It literally releases the locking mechanism right after firing, and the explosive force pushes it back. And that backwards explosion causes the next one to chamber.
Yep. Okay. So thinking about it, just from that explanation in my mind, the gas-powered or gas-operated sounds like it has a higher rate of consistent fire versus the recoil-operated. It sounds like there could be potentially, depending on the environment, things that would prevent the recoil mechanism from, let's say, reloading or recocking the gun to get it ready to fire again. Is that right or wrong, Mike?
Yes, the recoil operation is more finicky with temperature changes and shell size changes.
Okay.
But it is less prone to foul, where a gas gun, if it's not designed correctly, the fouling from the powder will cause it to stop operating.
Oh, sure.
Because it will block gas ports, whereas a recoil, as long as it's dry and at a stable temperature, will never foul, essentially.
Okay.
Yes. So there's benefits and there's negatives. It's also lighter. So a recoil operation is a lot lighter than a gas mechanism. There's no tubes. There's no ports. It's just straight back and straight forward.
Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah. So like a lighter, and we'll get into this later, but a lighter semi-automatic shotgun, typically going to be recoil operated. But a shotgun that is going to be used for a variety of loads that's a semi-auto will be gas.
Yeah. My next question, Mike.
Yes.
The Germans, they ever come around to the shotgun thing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, they did. There's a number of very fine made German firearms. Yes, they did.
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, Germans, I don't want to say anything bad necessarily because my grandmother was full-blooded German, so I'm a lot German. I don't know how much innovation the Germans had, but everything they got their hands on, it seems like they made infinitely more efficient.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I don't know if German that's an accurate statement.
German manufacturing, especially before the First World War, was probably the best in the world. Arguably, you could say it was the best in the world. So they're the ones that took the French design for the machine gun and turned it into an effective weapon on a battlefield.
Okay.
So, yeah. The Germans wanted to ban both machine guns, which they used a lot, and the shotguns, just because of the fatality numbers. It was frightening to the German military leadership how many people were dying.
Yeah.
Which should have been the first notion that maybe fighting a world war was a bad idea if the casualty rates are frightening the leadership of one half of the conflict.
Well, and the Germans who more or less started both of them.
Arguably. I mean, that's the perspective that we learn.
Yeah.
Second World War for sure. First World War.
For sure. The First World War.
Much more convoluted.
That Archduke Franz Ferdinand thing, but whatever. I mean, the Germans were angry both times, so.
Right.
Keep the sauerkraut and the beer flowing over there, please, and they won't have any aspirations, right?
Yes. And now German shotguns are considered very high end. So.
I believe it.
Yeah, for hunting purposes, obviously.
Yes. Hunting of game animals purposes.
Yes. And they make fully auto shotguns, which I'm not covering really.
And not the Jesse Ventura, you haven't hunted till you've hunted man. Just to clarify for everybody, since we are both based in Minnesota, so we're technically a Minnesota podcast. Jesse Ventura was governor here and said some unfortunate things.
Yes. And I love
hilarious
Jesse Ventura.
and meme-worthy, but, some not very good things for the national stage.
Yes. And I love him. I think Jesse's great. I know that we're not talking about politics, but...
No, I mean, I'd smoke a cigar with the guy for sure. I don't know that I'd go on a hunting trip on his island without knowing exactly what we were hunting before we landed. But...
So, as an update, I'm about halfway through.
Yeah, I'm a little past halfway. We had some technical difficulties that seem to have kind of resolved themselves through nothing that we necessarily did, I don't think. But when I'm trying to troubleshoot and I have something to smoke, I just kind of I smoke. And I don't want to say I drink, but maybe both those things are true. What are your thoughts on the cigar, Mike?
So far, it's very thick smoke, extreme pepper. Very strong tasting cigar, and I love it. I think it's great. This is exactly what I want a Rocky Patel Edge to be. Just a kick in the face. Very peppery, very strong.
Yes. I concur. I think that the pepper started out strong, and I think it's only gotten stronger somehow. Maybe it's just the strength of the nicotine. It's not necessarily any more peppery, but it hasn't subsided. Like the pepper hasn't gotten less. No. And I'm definitely feeling kind of the buzz from this one. And we don't always feel a buzz from cigars, but this is one that I definitely do.
Yes. I mean, I know for a fact that I recommend it. We'll get to the ranking, obviously, here when we're done, but... It's a good cigar. If you're a cigar smoker, I would not recommend this for somebody who is not a enthusiast. Let's put it that way.
Well, yeah, and I think somebody who doesn't like the kick in the face, as you described it, Mike, I wouldn't recommend it for people that don't like that. If they like a lighter, more subtle cigar, this is probably not the cigar for you. But if you like pepper and spice, and I guess a lot of nicotine content, then this one is one you should definitely check out. But again, we're halfway or a little beyond halfway, so we'll let you know at the very, very end.
Yes. So, Nate, in the shotgun world, we don't go by caliber. We go by the gauge.
Yes.
Now, the gauge refers to the diameter of the inside of the barrel. Now, do you know why it's called a gauge?
Well, it's called a gauge because we used to just have regular numbers for this shit. And the bigger the number, the bigger the bullet, because America. But then Obama got in office, and he said, no. We got to confuse these people so they don't use guns anymore. So all we can say now is, thanks, Obama.
That is exactly it. Not.
I know. I'm just teasing. I don't know why we use gauge. I mean, we use gauge in cigar world, right? I mean, the cigar is a whatever gauge, and they use it in the emo punk realm too with their earlobes. And the bigger the earlobe, they're like, this is a 2 gauge, and it's like, well, your earlobes are hanging down to your knees, bro. It's got to be a 2000 gauge, but a 2000 gauge would be incredibly small, I guess. I know a 410 shotgun is very small compared to, and a 12 gauge, I believe, is the most common gauge of shotgun, maybe in the world, at least in the hunting realm. But they also have 16 gauges. My Remington is actually a 20 gauge.
Yes.
Which is smaller than a 12.
Yes, it is. So we will get into that in the gauges, and 12 is the most common size. 20 is second.
I believe there's also an 8 gauge, isn't there, Mike? There's an 8 and a 16, I think.
So we'll hear. You'll hear. So
Okay.
A gauge is determined by the number of lead balls that are that size that makes a pound, which is 16 ounces, which is a unit of measurement that doesn't make any sense outside of the context of pounds. So a 12-gauge shotgun, 12 balls, the diameter of a 12-gauge bore, which is 0.729 inches, make 1 pound.
Oh, okay. Of the little
Yes.
balls?
So 12.729 inch spheres make a pound, and that's why it's called 12 gauge and not a 729 caliber, which it is a .729 caliber.
Okay. But
Yes.
but you can get different size shot in your 12 gauge, right?
That is shot size. That is not the gauge. The
Okay,
gauge
and
is just the size of the bore and how they determine the size of the bore.
Okay.
Yes.
And that was, can you repeat that again? How they determine the size of the bore?
Yes. The bore is the number of lead balls at that diameter that you have to make a pound.
Okay.
So a 4 bore, which is a 4 gauge, is a 1.052 inch diameter shotgun barrel. And it makes 4 balls that size make 1 pound. And that's why it's called a 4 gauge.
So is it always that size ball? So like a 12 gauge has 12 of those same whatever
Yes.
size balls? Why?
Yes.
Who chose that size ball?
I believe it was determined back in the days of the English gunsmiths, because you would buy your shot by the size of weight. So you would buy a pound, and you would buy a pound of shot of single ball for a 10 gauge, and you would get 10 balls, and that's why it's a 10 gauge, because 1 pound of lead made 10 balls that you could shoot as a single bullet.
Okay. And if you bought 1 pound of lead for a 12 gauge, you would get 12 balls?
Yes.
But it's the same pound of lead.
Same pound of lead.
But a 10 gauge is a bigger bore than a 12 gauge.
Yes.
Okay. So I got really angry for a moment, Mike, because I don't like complicated math trying to figure out shit. But
it is
ridiculous. I've come around now because you were talking about like the size of the balls, and I'm like, well, that's what the fuck? But I get it. If you buy a pound of lead, how many balls does it take to fit in your barrel? Like that makes sense. Like, as silly as it may seem, it's an old holdover, and I get angry about how many feet are in a mile. Like, what the fuck is that about? That's not the point of this episode. I'm just saying, like, sometimes some of this stuff is very frustrating, but it makes sense. So I'm with you.
By the end, you'll be even more frustrated because you know the number that is coming. We both do.
Yeah.
Anyway, back in the day when shotguns were custom made, pretty much every gauge size was made because every firearm was custom made. And then you would get ammunition that was custom made. So you could have any gauge, a 14 gauge or a 3 gauge or a whatever gauge. In modern times, let's say 1850s and larger, they made it more standardized. So we're going to go over some of the standard sizes, okay? The largest standard size shotgun that you can still reasonably find is the 4 gauge, otherwise known as the 4 bore. And this is the old school elephant gun. Right, so you see the pictures of the guy wearing the safari suit, and he's got this gun that's longer than he is with a servant, and the servant's carrying the gun, and then he shot the gun over the servant's shoulder because it's too big to hold. That's the 4 gauge. It's a huge gun.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Was that a hinged shotgun, Mike?
Most of them are hinged shotguns. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify because we were talking about unhinged until Browning invented the hinged. So I wanted to be sure.
It was not Browning that created the hinge. No. The hinge was created by an unknown gunsmith in England during their hunting craze.
Didn't he visit?
Before his time.
Didn't he visit England once? I'm just kidding, Mike.
Before his time.
Okay, so it wasn't Browning.
It was not Browning. It was an 1830s unknown smith that ended up becoming a very popular design.
Okay, I have another question before we kind of keep rolling.
Yeah.
What years was Browning alive?
Well, Browning died in the 1920s, and he was active in the 1880s.
Okay.
Yeah. He's turn of the century into early 20th century.
Okay.
So, Yep.
That helps put things in perspective because I know you went through the timeline of kind of the advancements in firearms and stuff, and it helps to know when Browning was active, if he invented and pioneered a lot of these things.
So 4-bores are illegal to hunt in the United States with now, as are punt guns.
Damn it.
Which punt guns...
What about blunderbusses?
Blunderbusses, they might be legal because they're black powder. Black powder regulations are different. You know, a 4-bore was designed for modern shot, and a punt gun is basically a cannon that was mounted to the front of a boat to flock shoot animals for market hunting, which is also illegal in the United States.
Yeah, punt gun was only ever used for hunting. I believe Lewis and Clark had a punt gun. They had a cannon mounted on the front of some of their boats.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a very effective way to kill large amounts of game to feed large amounts of people.
Yes, game.
Yeah, and that's partially responsible for the decline of wildlife that was ended by TR in the early 1900s when that stuff became against the law, basically.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go up to the 10 gauge. The 10 gauge is the largest legal size to use for hunting in the United States.
You know what? That's got to kick like a sumbitch. I don't know how to tell you this.
I have shot geese with a 10 gauge.
Okay.
And I shot one flight into decoys with the 10 gauge, and I put it away, and I went and hunted with a 12 gauge after that.
Yeah.
It is not a joke. So the 10 gauge, because of modern shotgun shells, is not used a whole lot anymore. The only practical purpose for a 10 gauge now is to shoot geese at sea because they fly so high.
Yeah.
When lead was banned for goose hunting from 87 to 91, it was phased out.
Yep.
They invented the 3.5-inch chamber for a 12 gauge. And that 3.5-inch chamber basically made the 10 gauge obsolete. So you don't see a lot of 10 gauges. I've shot them. I know people that own them. It's kind of a flex for guys who shoot a lot of geese, especially high-flying geese late in season.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I would recommend.
You can do a 3.5-inch shell in a 20 gauge too, as long as the gun is rated for it. You know what I mean? Like I've shot 3.5 in mine.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that as well.
Well, yeah. I just mean like there's some calibers and gauges of guns that exist out there that for largely North American game, and I'm talking like contiguous United States game, it's ridiculous. Like there's no reason to. But if you go to Alaska or parts of Canada, you might potentially be hunting game that is big enough to warrant those sizes. But by and large, you don't need a 10 gauge or a 338 or something.
Right. Yeah, and 10 gauges come in a 3.5-inch chamber as well, and that is a lot of powder. That is a lot of a round going down range at a goose.
Yeah.
So it's very specific application. I knew a lot of guys out west that had them.
Yeah, I don't know that I would even want a 10 gauge for like the zombie apocalypse. I mean, that's what a lot of these people. Well, we'll get into it when we talk about like the tactical stuff, but a lot of people like to say if there's ever a zombie apocalypse. You don't really need a 10 gauge, I don't think.
No,
for that.
No, you want a 12 gauge.
You want a 12 gauge, like sawed off, like riot shotgun or something. You know, that's got a wide spread. You don't need the and even Are you going to talk about chokes and stuff, Mike?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
That will come later.
Yes. Okay. Good. So stay tuned because we're going to talk about chokes and other things. We're not done with this episode yet.
No.
But it's definitely going to carry over to another episode, I do believe.
Yes. So frame of reference, a 4 gauge is a 1-inch diameter. A 10 gauge is 3/4 of an inch, little over. 12 gauge is 0.729. And the 12 gauge is the dominant force in the shotgun world because you can get it chambered in 3-inch, 2 3/4 inch, 3.5-inch. You can have light frames, heavy frames, short receiver, long receiver. There's the most sizes of firearms themselves, and there's the most type of ammunition. We'll get into the types that are available, but they make 12 gauge ammo in every shape and size, even shapes and sizes that are not available to the general public, down to 2.5-inch shell. So this is the gun, by far the most popular firearm. And it's the most versatile because they make it in every configuration imaginable. So we really don't need to talk that much about the 12 gauge because it's going to be talked about a lot later.
Yeah.
The 16 gauge, which is a relic of the past, they still make them for collecting. This is 0.662 inches in diameter. They really only make them in 2 3/4 inch chamber. So because they only come in a 2 3/4 inch chamber, you're limited on the type of ammunition you can make. And you can have a 16 gauge in either a 12 gauge frame or a 20 gauge frame or a 16 gauge frame. But because the next one down, which is the 20 gauge at 0.61 inch in diameter, because they make those in 3 and in 3.5 inch chamber, you don't need a 16 gauge anymore. Because you can get the same amount of power out of a 20 as you can in a 16 on the same exact frame. And you can get a 20 gauge in a small frame and in a large frame, just like you can a 12. So these two guns, because of the ubiquitous sizing you can get in a 12 and a 20, they have more or less eliminated the need for the 10 or the 16. They are obsolete.
Yeah.
There's only collectors have these or very specific use application. And the 16 really has no specific use because, like I say, you can get a 20 fitted for a small child or a 20 fitted for a man. And they're the same basic platform.
Well, that's what my 20 is. I got my 20 when I was hunting age, which is different now in modern times because I'm pre a lot of this. I remember going hunting at 12 with a gun, being able to go and shoot things. And now what is it, Mike? 16?
12. You can hunt. You can actually hunt earlier than that now if you're with a parent or guardian. So you can get your hunter safety certificate still at 12. But you can hunt deer at 10, I want to say, if a guardian is with you. Yeah. Yeah, you can hunt younger now than when we were growing up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They've expanded it.
I mean, at 12, I had to sit with my dad, but I got the 20 gauge. They got it with the extended barrel, like a longer barrel, because I'm a tall person. You know, I mean, but that's the cool thing about these. What do you call them? The field break or the breakdown? Because you can put any length barrel on the receiver.
Yeah, and if you have an 870, you can get a barrel size anywhere from 18 to 40, and it's made by Remington Firearms. So it's not some janky nonsense. It's the real deal.
Yeah, and you can even get, and I don't know if you can talk about this, Mike, but you can even get a rifled barrel for your shotgun to shoot slugs through.
We will talk about that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So the next size down is going to be the 28 gauge. This is 0.55 inches. This is used only by people who are very active shooters. 28 gauge is a show-off gun for guys that shoot a lot, and they like the challenge. Largely, they use it for skeet, but I know guys that'll shoot upland game with it as well, and they'll shoot heavy load out of it. Okay. And it's more challenging. They usually use really tight chokes, which we'll talk about later. Yep. And they just make it more difficult for themselves as a more sporting adventure because you have less payload and everything.
Okay, yeah.
And then we're going to talk about what is now commonly called the 410 bore.
Okay,
which is the 36 gauge.
I was hoping you were going to talk about that one.
And this is the one that is going to make
Mike,
angry.
It's the 12 is the most popular, followed by the 20, and then is it the 410?
Yeah, so it goes 20, 28, and then 410, which is actually a 36 gauge.
Okay, so now I'm going to get upset again, Mike.
Right.
Why is it called the 410 and not the 36?
That's a good question, Nate. I don't really know. There's no logical reason for it because you can buy parts for 36 gauge guns, but it's commonly called a 410. And even more interesting, a 410 shotgun shell can be put in a 45 caliber pistol. So you can buy a pistol in 410 that's actually a 45 caliber pistol, which why is a 410 bored shotgun shell fitting in a 45 caliber pistol round? It's because it doesn't have a brass case. It has plastic.
Okay.
So it is the same diameter as a 45 caliber pistol.
Why is it not called the 45 shotgun then?
Well, right?
I'm getting angry, Mike. I'm getting upset.
Yep. And the 410 is really a youth gun. They're extraordinarily expensive.
Are
and
they
you can
now?
use them for
They
squirrels.
used to be pretty cheap, weren't they? Well, you can use them for squirrels, but I know a lot of like snipe and woodcock hunters tend to like the 410s. But they're very small birds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can use them for small birds. Lizards. Down in Florida, guys will shoot lizards out of the trees with them.
Okay.
Like iguanas.
Yeah, fuck you, lizard.
Yeah. I have a cousin who likes to hunt grouse with a 410.
Okay.
Yep. And he shoots really tight. There's not a lot of lead. And he shoots a lot of skeet. So he'll shoot really tight constriction. And basically it's like shooting a bullet instead of a shotgun spread. And this is, like I say, it's largely obsolete because you can get a 20 gauge that's just as light as a 410, but you have a more powerful cartridge. Or you can weaken up your load and essentially shoot a 410 load out of a 20. And you can find 20 gauge guns everywhere for dirt cheap, where a 410 is now rising in cost because of the dominance of the 12 and the 20.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I have some key points for gauges for anybody who's confused, and hopefully you're not. Gauge is not directly related to the shot size or the payload of the shot. So you can have a number 7 shot in any of these firearms with any dram weight. It's just the diameter of the shell, essentially. And it does limit the...
Based on what? The pound of lead put down into balls or something, right?
Yes. Yeah. The smaller gauges are limited on the larger end of how much shot you can put in, but not on the lower end. So you can put as low of a load into a 12 gauge as you want and get the same number of pellets as a 410, basically.
Yep.
Yes. And then, the note, we already talked about it. A 410 is essentially a 36 gauge, even though it's not called a 36, which is also a 45 caliber pistol round.
For some reason, unknown to science.
Right. And you can buy pistols that are specifically designed to shoot both 410 shotgun shells and 45 caliber revolver rounds.
Are you talking the judge?
The judge, the governor. Yep.
The governor, yeah. Yes. Mike, my fingers, they're burning.
They're burning. Oh, no. I have a quarter left, probably there, but the show is over when the first cigar is smoked. So what are your thoughts, sir?
You know what? I like it. I've liked this one. I think it got... Well, and I'm trying to come to my senses, but I think that the middle portion really kind of 8-gauged me in the head with the nicotine. And I feel like the last third was a little less strong nicotine-wise, or it didn't increase from the second third. But the flavor has been very strong and consistent. I think, I like this one quite a bit. It's strong and unrelenting.
It's a very strong cigar, and it's very peppery. It is not dark, but it is getting stronger, but not darker as you go. Equal amounts of pepper throughout, and it is very unrelenting. And the nicotine, I can feel a buzz from the nicotine, which is atypical.
Yeah.
Very atypical, but it is lovely. And I've already rated it on our list, so I beat you to the punch on this one.
You beat me to what punch, Mike?
Mm-hmm. You couldn't... I didn't have to steal your answer. You're going to have to steal mine.
So I didn't steal Mike's. I went a 5.5. He went a 5.25. This one's really good. Really good. I'm trying to remember one of the other cigars we had that really clubbed us in the face with the nicotine content.
I would say the cigar we smoked with gravy.
This is
the last one that I remember.
I think the V660 has quite the nicotine content as well, if I remember correctly.
It does. It does have a lot of nicotine. It does. And this is, like I say, one of my favorites. I love the edges. This is a great example of an edge, not for the novice. But
no. If
you're going to go out onto the boat for the day and you want a heavy smoke to enjoy while pretending to fish for bass and finding bottle bass, this is the one, right? This is the one. It is lovely. And they're reasonable, and you can find them pretty much everywhere.
Yes.
Which is a big bonus.
Yes. So we recommend the Rocky Patel, the Edge Corojo. History of the Shotgun Part 1 concluded. History of the Shotgun Part 2 next week. Thanks for listening.
Be safe. Have fun.